In our first update on the wheat crop across the southern Great Plains, we head to Manhattan, Kansas, home of Kansas State University, where we're talking with Dr. Romulo Lolotto. Dr. Lolotto, how are things looking across Kansas?
Hi, Dave. Yeah, well, thanks for having me here today. Is a pleasure to be here sharing some of our thoughts with you. I guess whenever we think of the 2023-2024 wheat crop, as it can happen in many seasons, things are spotty out there around the state, depending whether or not those regions of the state receive any recent rainfall, right? But before I get into that, let me backtrack a little bit and just contextualize what we are seeing here in Kansas, and perhaps why the situation may be a little bit worse in some years as well, right? So if we compare to the folks down south in Oklahoma, at least when I was there in Oklahoma, right, it seems like that we had quite a bit of continuous wheat. So wheat on wheat, right, with that summer fallow in between, which that kind of allows growers to capitalize on optimum planting dates. Whenever the rainfall comes by, there's no, I mean, for the majority, there's no summer crop growing there that they can actually plant at the time. Now, I know how things change, maybe some soybeans creeping up there and cotton as well, right? But here in Kansas, that's actually the reality of the majority of the acres. It's continuous cropping for many cases, at least the phase when wheat is being planted, right? So, for example, Central Kansas, the great majority of the wheat crop actually gets planted right after a soybean crop, right? So we're waiting on the harvest of a soybean crop, and then after the harvest occurs, growers go out there and plant the wheat. As we move to western Kansas, the majority is still on summer fallow ground, so that allows for a little bit better timing. But there's a lot of acres of wheat now going right after corn as well. As soon as the even dry land, as soon as growers harvest the corn, they are then planting their wheat crop. So it gets into the same situation with soybeans in central Kansas, in that we're waiting on the harvest of a summer crop. The harvest comes many times later than our optimum planting date, and we are planting into a drier than usual soil profile because we didn't give a chance for that fallow ground to accumulate some water, right? So that's those are conditions that we experience in the majority of the state. It's kind of like wheat being planted more as as kind of like a double crop after some of those summer crops, than the main crop being planted at that optimal time. So that worsens the planting conditions a little bit, again, because we're not many times not at the optimal time and planting into a drier profile. In 2023 planting now specifically, right, it seems like those conditions have even been worsened because we're getting out, hopefully, of a third year in a row of La Nina, right? And so those 3 years that we had on La Nina, essentially, they really dried out our profile, both in the winter crop and in the summer crop as well. So essentially, back in track in a couple of years when we were planting in 2021, which was the second year of La Nina, we were coming out of a dry season, but there was moisture in the profile due to some summer rainfall that we had. Now, the 2022 planting last year, we were with a dry profile because we're coming out of a summer crop that was dry, plus a previous winter crop that was quite dry as well. And that was kind of the situation this year again, is like we have, for the most part, getting into September, we had a very dry profile, right? Essentially, virtually no moisture in the profile there, and also not much in the topsoil that we could work with. Now, I mentioned in the beginning that conditions are scattered depending on whether there was some rain received here and there. And so around mid-September or so, the western part of the state got actually a pretty nice shower in that southwest part of the state. I think that some of our mesonet stations measured up to 4 inches or so. So that,
Wow.
yeah, that not only set up the crop to start in a good condition, but also to make it through the winter and perhaps have some good moisture to start the spring as well, right? And so in the southwest part of the state, things were terrible. Again, a couple, 3 years in a row of very, very bad crop conditions. But then some parts of the state got a very nice shower there that the wheat crop got planted right away, right? Either immediately before that rain or as soon as the soil dried out enough. And the crop out there is not looking bad. I mean, I've been actually seeing quite a bit of activity on Twitter, and it has been a few years since I saw a good crop in southwest Kansas, as we're seeing the start of this crop this year as well. So a blessing there that we haven't had in a few years for the southwest part of the state. A little bit later in the month there, they've in more like towards late September, we had some showers that got more like northwest Kansas and north central part of the state.
Mhm.
Timely rain as well, right? Because that's kind of the optimal time for us to be planting wheat really in north central and northwest Kansas in that late September, early October, right? And so that rain was quite timely, and growers were able to actually get some good moisture, at least to start planting into. Right, we definitely need more to make a good profile, but at least to get planting into, we had good moisture conditions in those parts of the state. We've missed some of those rains kind of in the central and south central part of the state. So there were some moisture there in that mid-September or so that some growers were able to capitalize with an early planting. Since then, it's been actually pretty dry. And so I'll give you even an example in our own trials, right? We we have been waiting on a soybean crop to be harvested, but that soybean crop is not going to to make more than 8 or 9 bushels per acre. Just made the insurance cut, so the grower is going to have to
Right.
harvest that. But I'm hearing of a lot of growers actually planting into a standing soybean crop that didn't even make that insurance cut. Right, and so that's the condition in central Kansas. That soybean crop, even though it very low yield potential, it took up some water to create whatever yield potential is there. Dry planting conditions, right, and we're going to kind of have to pray for a rain here pretty soon for that crop to get into a good stand establishment there. Again, scattered showers, right? Regional around Salina, which is right there in central Kansas. They got about an inch of rainfall just last week. So that should make the wheat crop quite happy there. You go a few miles south from there, McPherson or so, already they kind of missed that shower. So again, quite spotty. One recommendation, Dave, that we're talking about for growers in these conditions, right? Growers who are planting their wheat crop now, but they have a dry profile, right? Or even a dry topsoil, is we need to treat it as it is a late planted crop,
Hmm.
right? If that crop is not going to emerge here within the next few days, we need to treat that crop as a late planted crop. And what do I mean by that? If we're planting the crop late, we're pretty much planting, we're going to have less time for that crop to tether, right? It's going to emerge late, and it's going to have, we're going to have less time for that crop to tether. So we need to do everything that we can right now to ensure that we're going to have as many tillers as we can out there, because temperature accumulation is not going to be in our side, right? So what we mean by that is ramping up seeding rates, right? We need to be thinking of higher seeding rates if we're planting now in a dry profile. We also need to be thinking of, if possible, putting out some starter fertilizer, right? There are a few situations where starter fertilizer really pays the bill there, and one of them is when we're planting late. And so thinking about putting out starter fertilizer becomes more important in these situations now. And also like a fungicide seed treatment, right? Because if we're going to put that seed out there and it's going to lay dry and wait until a rainfall comes by for it to emerge, there are greater chances that some diseases or will actually impact that seed, right? It's going to emerge into cooler soil conditions as well. That increases the chances for some fungal diseases. And so, again, treating that seed with fungicide seed treatment becomes important. Putting out starter fertilizer and ramping up seeding rates if we're planting now, mid-October, into soils that are dry and we don't intend to see any germination there within the next few days.
What's the attitude of the producers that you've talked to across the state? Are they excited about the potential for a better than 23 wheat crop?
With the forecast for a potential El Nino, right, above average chances of a potential El Nino there, that definitely brings up the hopes, right, the hopes of the producers up, and I think that producers will be willing to invest in the crop a little bit more. So that's the general feeling that I'm getting, is that it is like a finally we're maybe getting out of that 3 year in a row of an El Nino of La Nina, right? And so that definitely brings hope up some, and so I think that we're seeing a little bit better attitude towards wheat this year than we have seen in the past. Yes,
What
or at least in the past couple of years, I should say, right?
right? Yeah. There's always that hope for a better crop than some of the best years, but always better than last year. And speaking of the last year crop, what did we see with a smaller crop, did we see higher proteins across the state with the wheat that was coming in? Were there any bright spots to the 23 crop?
Usually that's what we see, right? We see a lower yield, and that kind of relates to a higher protein, right? So definitely there was more protein out available last year than in a normal year. Now last year was also kind of funny because some of the rainfall came late, right? We had some rainfall that came out late May and early June across the state, and temperatures were pretty cool until that mid-June time frame, right? So that combination actually, for those fields that were exposed to that combination, proteins were more at the average level, right? Because again, the late season, cool temperatures, and a little bit of moisture available still made up that we compensated a little bit of the low yield potential, but it was definitely above average protein compared to a normal Kansas crop. So that, I guess, it's on the upside, right? Even though from the meal perspective, they can kind of source that protein if they needed to from elsewhere as well. But it's also always good to have it in the state and make sure that things that we stay within and we actually have a good market for that. So at least on that was an upside. But I guess the bigger picture upside that we had was that the late season, cool temperatures, and some moisture that came down in parts of the state, they at least ensured that we didn't have a complete failure, right? I think that was the biggest picture of last year, is that mid-May we're starting to travel around the state doing with our wheat plot tours, and it was very depressing, right? It was very depressing because just because of the conditions of the crop. But then temperatures started to cool down a little bit, and we had some moisture that came down that helped the crop at least make sure that we didn't have a complete failure on last year's wheat crop.
Going into this wheat crop, if you had one piece of advice for Kansas wheat producers across the state, what would it be for this crop?
Well, beyond make sure that we have a good stand establishment, right? Make sure that right now that's what we're looking at, right? Make sure that we give that crop all the conditions that it has really to thrive, right? And that we need our plant population or our tillers with growers working with lower populations there, right? But so beyond that, which is kind of depending where we are in the state, that's kind of late for that advice. But really be on the lookout for whether those forecast El Nino conditions would really take place, right? Because that brings more moisture to our state, and that brings higher yield potential as well. So it will be a year to try and compensate for the last 2 or 3 years that we have had a very low yields, right? So be on the lookout for that, because what we've seen back in 2016, 2017, 2019, there were years when we had higher yield potential in Kansas. Is that we had a very low protein crop, and that's because there was not enough nitrogen out there for the crop to make up yield, right? And so we're leaving yield behind, we're leaving yield in the table every time that our wheat crop doesn't make around 11.5 protein percent, right? So be on the lookout right now in February, March, when we're putting out that top dress application for the forecast. Is really El Nino coming around, and we're going to have the higher yield potential. Well, I would make sure that we have some nitrogen out there in the profile for those plants to really capitalize on it and be able to produce a good grain yield and capitalize on that. And another thing to be on the lookout, if we do have an El Nino year, is just the incidence of fungal diseases later in the spring, right? And specifically, stripe rust has taken a toll on our yields all these years that we had higher yielding conditions, depending on the year, leaf rust. And more recently here, we saw even some stem rust creeping up. And so, again, if we do have an El Nino year, it's a year to try and capitalize and make some bushels out there. And to do that, we need to make sure that our bases are covered in terms of enough fertility out there, as well as make sure that we're covered in terms of disease incidence and disease potential.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Lolotto, for going on with us and giving us an update on the 2024 Kansas wheat crop.
Thank you, Dave. I appreciate the opportunity to share some thoughts with you.